All right, so I'm here with Allie Moore. She works at Chapul Farms, and I believe right now your main product you're growing is black soldier flies, right? And that's for use in animal feeds, correct?
Yes, animal feed and their poop is frass fertilizer.
Right. Anything else you want to add, like sort of as an introduction to you or Chapul Farms, or I know you do some work on insects on your own time. So
Yeah, I mean, the short intro is I spent the last 12 years of my life kind of as a advocate for the insect industry, started blogging about it, remained very independent, loved kind of the sensationalizing part of it, which is uh, yeah, viewed with mixed emotions now. But the cool part is today I'm working full time for the first time with a super group of folks I've admired from across the industry to really integrate insects as a keystone species into agriculture in a meaningful way that makes sense business wise and has a lot of positive externalities.
cool. Would you say your focus, I know the company does more like feed now, but would you say your focus as an individual is more on human edible insects or maybe the feed side?
Yes, my focus right now is just on the like planetary health, like kind of realizing like what an impact is. A lot of the no hate to climate tech. It's so needed, and we need progress on all fronts. But there's like an analogy of if you don't have a good foundation, it's like building a skyscraper on quicksand, right? And things happen in cycles: carbon cycle, water cycle, day cycle. Nutrients have a cycle, and the food sector at large, food and feed, have a cycle. And if we don't close that loop, it doesn't matter how much we invest into like cultured meat or bacteria that can do things or carbon capture technology. Like you have to get your fundamentals right. So
Mm.
that's my focus. But in the past, absolutely on food. You mentioned that you'd become a skeptic of that, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories, and I totally understand why.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable to many people. Yeah, and I'll admit to like taking joy and having a lot of curiosity around why that made people so
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm, trying to do with this whole documentary and these interviews is kind of examine that, why I know everyone calls it the ick factor. So examine that a little bit. And yeah, and then also there's the focus on the environmental stuff. So uh I'm going to get into the environmental stuff in a little bit, but to start off, because I know you're working at Chapul, could you discuss what that company does? Just
Yeah. So we're working on the pitch. I need to practice in particular. So thank you for the opportunity. Chapul Farms is a ecosystem services company broadly. Sometimes we position as waste management, other times nutrient recovery, other times, yeah, feed, fertilizer production. Depends on the stakeholder. It's not just we're doing a different business model than traditional. It's circular. Also, that means very hard to explain, and it fills a lot of roles. But in a sense, we use insects, black soldier fly larvae, to upcycle things that would have gone to landfill, organics waste. That just means anything that's like food. And instead of going to a landfill, costing money to do that and releasing emissions, the black soldier fly larvae are nature's technology essentially that upcycle it really quickly while also decontaminating it. So biorecycling, it's like what nature has evolved to do these services. There's not waste, there's no landfills in a natural ecosystem. So it's just from an economic sense only, purely, it makes sense to upcycle nutrients that are currently being wasted, put them back into our system, replenish biodiversity to the guts of animals that eat this, and then to the soils of the land that is fertilized with the fertilizer. So
Mhm.
that's the loop.
Yeah, so you guys basically you have a big barn, for lack of a better word, and it gets human food waste and things like that, and then you actually grow these black soldier fly larvae, which are then like a useful source of protein, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and
And
that's
then the whole service is custom. Sorry to cut you off.
oh yeah, no, yeah, I just I think a lot of people aren't aware of this side of insect farming, and like to me it just seems so obviously like a good idea. You know, agriculture is like basically our attempt to mimic nature, and it's like we've tried to cut insects out of it entirely, and they're such a key component of it. So yeah, I
Yeah.
just think it's a really great idea. So I'm glad I was able to talk to you with
Thanks.
working through Chapul. Um,
Thank you.
so let's see. So specifically on, so I had a question about feed, I guess. normally this would be more, this would pertain to crickets, right? Which that's a question. Do you guys actually still grow crickets? I know in the past that was the intention at
Yeah.
Chapul, but is that
So
something you
there's
still do?
with my Buggable hat on, that was my brand that focused on like getting people to eat bugs and all that.
Mm,
I'm still like really curious about this as an industry because how often do you get to witness the growth and the trajectory of like a new like global industry? And that's kind of cool from like a business or like a cultural anthropologist lens. Crickets were just kind of happenstance. That's why like they're one of the bigger US bugs. They are still in industry. Chapul works with a woman-owned regenerative farm in Vietnam to produce crickets wholesale. And so we still have that as a very small part of the business, but it's not the focus since the shift to these ecosystem services, waste management, and project development services. Now we're more focused on the black soldier fly as an insect and that bug biology. But the crickets are still one of the main crickets, mealworms, black soldier fly, I think those are the three main in the US right now. And that's just because we learned how to scale them up. There were
mm,
already like cricket factories for pets, food, and exotic animals like snakes and reptiles, but they weren't human grade. So the first
mm.
wave of like insect farming for human grade, that was with crickets. And because of that, a lot of the legislation was first for crickets and then other insects followed.
Okay. And actually, on that point, so you guys grow on the black soldier fly larva. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that like regulations say you can't really feed to humans, correct? Well, if they're grown on like food waste.
Yeah, regulatory landscape is a nightmare. Not a nightmare, but it's complicated.
Okay.
And in the US, it's like so there's the FDA, there's AFCO. These are two bodies. The FDA is for human food, AFCO is for pet feed. There's a whole different sector related to AFCO for animal feed. In the US, our laws are more complicated and rigorous for things you feed to your pets and your animals than things to get fed to humans. It's different in other countries. And I believe that we're still waiting on black soldier fly larva approval for the US for humans, but I believe we've received it for different categories of livestock. Like that also makes sense. It's been kind of annoying to see that a lot of the hang up is from lobby groups and not to call any out, but
Yeah.
like we're feeding fish and chickens corn and soy and it's like what do they eat in the wild?
Right.
They eat bugs, like a fish eats bugs. So
Yeah.
why is it not legalized yet to feed them bugs? But we'll get there. It's
Right.
like quickly happening.
That's good. Yeah. It's crazy that like we need to feed them soy. Kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
But
Um.
there's a lot of money at stake and that's why it stays that way for a
Yeah.
while.
So on the feed thing still, something I wanted to get clarification on is this whole thing of for insects to be considered human edible, they generally need to be fed human edible food. Um, so, you know, basically, this is coming from. I've been doing a lot of research about this for like the past 6 months, the past 3 months, really rigorously. So, this comes from the FAO publication in 2013, and they talk about.
Yeah.
So that's titled "Edible Insects: Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security." That was kind of where a lot of this edible insects talk got started.
Yeah.
So they talk about the fact that uh, if an insect is fed non-human grade food, so that's the things like corn, soy, and flax, wheat, whatever, um, they are only considered edible by humans or safe to eat for humans if they are gutted, which I think is usually things like crickets aren't gutted. So. So, I'm just reading this in that FAO publication. Is this something you know about and maybe could shed some light on?
Yeah. So that's like I love that you brought that up because that's kind of like the white paper that started it all.
Yeah, yeah,
The white paper went viral, meaning like I think about 9 million downloads in a day, but it really started a lot of conversations. So that was kind of a core piece. Things have changed a lot since then. Um, this is where you can cut me off if I go too deep down any rabbit hole, but uh, regulations have been updated. They are more nuanced and more accurately reflect like what feedstocks can be fed to insects for what like end use. So there are certain rules about what can be used as feed for different insects for different end states, whether that's pet food, human food, animal food, and they'll get different gradings. So it's, we should be treating everything that way. Like we should not be feeding, we should not be serving humans potatoes that were grown on fields that were fed like the certain chemicals and certain fertilizers. Same
Mm.
goes for like our pigs and everything else. With insects, they are following the same rules. We just lack the regulatory infrastructure to kind of usher different species along down similar pathways. Uh, Fun fact though is that since insects play this role of like biorecyclers and biofilters in nature, they do kind of miraculous things, especially the black soldier fly larvae. They have the ability to break down and decontaminate items. So they are the ones that kind of clean up soils and get rid of heavy metal accumulation, which is a problem we're seeing. We're seeing like reports about things containing microplastics and things containing like chemicals, heavy metals, and these bioaccumulate. So if you don't have the filter to clean them up, which is probably a mushroom or an insect or a bacteria, then bioaccumulation happens. So kind of ironically, it's safer for humans, unless you're talking about pathogens or parasites or little things where like if you don't know where that bug's from, like do not eat insects off the street in any city. That's not going to go well. But if it's farm raised, graded, especially for human consumption, it's far safer to eat than most livestock because it's further away from us genetically, and they have these special guts that really biofilter out a lot of potential contaminants that we are already accumulating.
Okay. So do you think there's a potential in the future, some future state where you could have insects eating, human food waste, like diverted from a landfill, and then those insects would be considered edible by humans?
Certainly. I don't think we're on track for that in the US. I would have spoken like that was my dream like 10 years ago, but just knowing like how we are culturally, like that's not a culture battle I want to wage.
Right, right.
We have so much demand for aqua feed, so much demand for poultry feed, and we want them to be fed really great things that they would eat naturally. So they make so much sense as a premium feed ingredient. And then on the fertilizer, soil health product side too, that I've laid off pushing it for humans. But I personally eat bugs every day because it's good for my body. You'll hear, I think some of the pitches that do work are that like for people that want functional foods, bodybuilders, people that aren't really like grossed out easily and just really
Mm-hmm.
want good nutrition that's bioavailable. I love it as an alternative to whey because whey creates gastrointestinal distress for me and I think a lot of other people. Insects don't. So it's just a clean way to get certain nutrients, protein beyond.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Um, so continuing on a little bit, this is still in the feed sort of category. Now, this is okay if you don't have like immediate familiarity with this off the top of your head, but it seems like you're pretty up on this stuff. So, in my research, I came across a few different papers that were looking at the feed conversion efficiencies of a bunch of different animals. So,
Yeah.
specifically, there's a study by Lundy and Perel in 2015, and there's a 2012 study. I think it's out of Wageningen University, so the names are tough. So it's
Yeah.
Us Unin. Oh my, I can't even Unin six and De Boer. But so basically the two did these studies. Lundy and Perel was on crickets, and the other one was on mealworms, and they were trying to determine protein conversion efficiencies. So that's how much protein from a plant can actually be incorporated into that animal's body that we can then eat. But the results of the study were that they found pretty much identical within 5% or so food conversion efficiencies between these insects and chickens. So I guess my question is like, first, do you have any familiarity with these studies, and what do you think the implications are of this? Because like I seem to hear that a lot is that they take less feed, and they certainly do as compared to like cows and pigs, right? But you know, if there's similar to chickens, would that make it difficult to sort of transition like the West into eating bugs? If there might not be as much of a financial gain there. They're not maybe as efficient as some people say they are. You know.
Yeah. So first, amazing questions. Like you've done your homework, and I applaud your
Oh, thanks.
pronunciation attempts too, because I can't pronounce many of the
I know the
studies and
crazy Dutch
papers.
names. Yeah.
You'll probably see Arnold van Huys's name appear a lot. He's
Yep.
like
Yeah.
another like major researcher. Ah, he's amazing. Just really cool people doing cool pioneering work. So feed conversion ratio is something we look very intensely at because that's like the name of the game. It's one of the drivers of unit economics or like anything that we want to translate into the business landscape of what makes sense. From a baseline, when you're looking at something like black soldier fly larvae, like in the US, we send over $5 billion worth of nutrients conservatively to the landfill. So at a baseline, we should not be doing that. We should make use of every dollar, like upcycle it. Um, the next layer is getting into LCAs or life cycle assessments. And these are things that I personally am very frustrated by I call it the ESG war. Like we are going to spend all of our time and attention trying to come up with metrics before we actually solve the problems. Like, oh my God, can we just not agree that
Yep.
like it's good to close the loop and all that?
So sorry,
So
what is
there's a
that?
lot of
ESG?
environmental, social justice, environmental, social, and governance metrics.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's what Wall Street is really concerned with right now, and it needs to happen. We just lack like a framework to really meaningfully account for things that are less like business has numbers, and we can count cash pretty easily, and that's how business happens. But now
Mm-hmm.
that we're trying to weave environmental impact into these equations, we need something comprehensive, consistent, and that everyone agrees on. To do that. And we're fighting a lot. Like every company has a different way that they're reporting environmental impact metrics. It's not the same. It's not rooted in good science. People are greenwashing. And that really risks destroying a lot of the efforts because people won't take companies seriously if too many people greenwash and like kind of uh, dirty the efforts. That ties into feed conversion ratio, FCR, because that's like a really important metric in a lot of these reports that people are giving. They vary a lot. They are so complicated, and system parameters are very important. So when you compare like a cricket to a chicken or to a cow, it's not so simple. Like so much of it depends on how the chicken or cow or pig is raised. There's a huge spectrum of like, is it regeneratively raised? Is it raised like well or
Mm-hmm.
like not well? Animal welfare, like how much water is used? How are they doing it like rotational grazing? Are they doing it like what scale is it at? So there's a lot of variance within a single species, and it's just not fair to kind of stack them up against each other. But a heuristic that works pretty well is looking at the food web and like how high something is on it. And when you grow, you lose efficiency. So think about like a huge business compared to like a very small startup. The huge business has a ton of like people kind of idle and anytime you scale up, you lose efficiency. Same goes with animals. So when you go higher in the food web, a cow is far higher in the food web than a cricket or an insect. So that organism is very efficient and trained at doing its little job, growing, dying. Like that's a small circle.
Mm-hmm.
The cow is bigger, the human's bigger. We're higher up on the food chain, so there's less efficiency. So it just makes sense. I think more papers have come out, and I can send you some links, but there's a lot of good research supporting different ways that insects are more efficient than most livestock, but it's always like a things in balance and moderation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you have that, I'd be definitely curious to take a look. Um,
And land use efficiency is another huge one. In addition to like the feed conversion ratio, it's just like how efficiently are we using the land? Crickets and insects make a ton of sense in cities. Like for the future of space travel, I'm so
right.
excited
Yeah.
that insects would definitely play a role there.
Oh, that's a cool
And
point.
again, yeah, yeah. So it's cool. Like there's a ton of like side applications that get people more excited and open to it than forcing Americans in particular to eat the bugs. But they make sense on so many ways. And at the
Yeah.
very least, they're like an amazing way to not have waste and to like pick up the slack.
Mm-hmm. So actually, you mentioned the land use, and I just wanted to ask because I had a hard time wrapping my head around like when using more land is necessarily bad, because obviously there's instances where if you are like a very ethical regenerative cattle farmer, well then you can make an argument that it's not bad that they're using more land, like as long as we weren't needing that land for something else, and like maybe they're actually helping the land or something like that. So I guess could you have any comments on like when is more like why is land use I guess bad? Because like they always say is like, oh, insects would be good because they use less land. So like why is it necessarily that that's the case? I guess.
Another great and complicated question. Yeah, so it's just where there is a lot of pressure on the land right now, mostly because we haven't done any regenerative farming practices, or many in the US, and we have immense like nutrient runoff, soil depletion. There's a lot like there is enough land. There's more than enough land, but how it's owned is not set up for success. Like another good heuristic is diversity equals survival, right? If things are diverse, our genetics and like everything that we know, like diversity is nature's way of ensuring survival. You can have mutations, aberrations, you can have, when you have a complex system, there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong. So diversity ensures that there are ways that things can go right too. Um, we've seen trends in agriculture, especially towards the opposite of diversity, towards extinction. And that's what happens when you have a very linear system. And another reason to restore the circularity to it, we've seen crop monoculture. So fewer and fewer crops. Like it's kind of wild when you look at like the crop situation. Like we've chosen to breed like what 12 main strains, and we used to have like hundreds and hundreds. The same with animals. Who owns the land? Like the concentration of all these brands under like fewer corporations, land ownership under fewer corporations. And so, in that way, we are really struggling with diversity in many different ways and shapes and sizes. The other issue is the soil health. Its soil health is just plummeting. It's very degraded. And a lot of that's due to the lack of restoration to the soil. And we've killed it with synthetic fertilizers. And we haven't had a good understanding of what's actually going on in soil until very recently. And it turns out there's another whole tiny ecosystem down there, like a bacterial diversity that normally does, it's capable of replenishing itself. So I'm going to cut myself off now, but just to talk about like the efficiency metrics, I just pulled up like a little comparison. 1 acre of land in 1 year of production with cows can do about 192 pounds of protein. 1 acre of land in 1 year of production in chickens can do about 265 pounds of protein. And with crickets can do 1 acre of land, 1 year of production plus crickets is about 65,000 pounds of protein. And with grubs, it's about over 1 million pounds of protein. So those statistics come from an LCA from EnviroFlight. And that's just like an example of land efficiency.
Yeah. And it, I assume, could be multiplied if you, because I've seen the plans to build these like multi-story insect farms. So, the land footprint is definitely very small. But so basically, you're saying because generally the agriculture that we're doing nowadays, with its like focus on monocropping and like intense yields, generally agriculture is going to be bad for the land. So it's a benefit in that way when done
Agriculture
incorrectly.
can, yeah, and we're seeing a huge shift. Like there are so many people working with the land now and like using restorative practices. And I'm worried that it won't happen quickly enough, or that like there's a lot of people doing it right, but if a few corporations that now own so much of it are not doing it right because they're not incentivized to, it's just like this kind of race to hit the tipping point on regenerative before we hit a tipping point on extractive. Um, but there's a ton of people doing amazing things, working with the land, rehabilitating it, like farming in ways that's like good, great even. So it's just like really hoping that they are able to get get a firm grip before, uh, before more land is grabbed
Yeah.
up.
So that's something. Would you say that there's a lot of people nowadays, like you said, moving to like regenerative cattle farming. Is that something you personally are like cool with,
Oh
or
yeah,
yeah?
yeah. A lot of people think that I'm like anti meat or anti whatever because I eat bugs, and it's like no. I think I do want to re-examine how I eat meat and what I eat, and align it with my values. I'll get to that at some point, but I think there are plenty of ways to consume meats of all types, to raise animals of all types, to do it in a way that's like thoughtful and regenerative, or at least like harm reducing. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
totally fine with that all.
yeah. So yeah, I was a little surprised to hear. I mean, so now you're the second person telling me that. I talked to Sarah Schlafly earlier today,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm
Oh,
sure you
she's
guys are.
awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, so I asked her the same question, and like she was very down with the whole regenerative local farming thing. So I think that's good. That'll
Yeah.
be good for people to hear. You know. Um,
It's just another byproduct of the times where we're like pitted against each other today. Like everyone's so, siphoned into
yeah.
these like news media cycle holes that it's not useful. But
Oh
everyone's kind
yeah.
of on the same team. We're all on the
Uh-huh.
same planet. Like we all, I think, want the best for everyone. And we're
Yeah.
all doing everything we can toward that end, but we just have different sources of info, you know?
Yeah. No, can't get me started on that. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. So I guess that's kind of all about the feed questions in particular. I've kind of a set of questions here that like these are just things that are difficult to find answers to, and no one's particularly talking about these online. Um, First question is about like, are there issues when growing bugs with containment? Because I would be concerned with it's something like 363,000. I did that math. Crickets to get the same amount of protein as a cow. So if there was a one cow escaped, that's not a big deal to go get it back. But I guess what would happen if the barn, there was an escape of 300,000 crickets, and especially in an area where they're
Yeah.
not native. Like, is this something you have considerations for when you're raising them?
Oh, yeah. So kind of ironically, and I'm certainly still embarrassed about this as like a bug person, I guess. I have a huge phobia of insects that are alive. And I justify that by saying, like, I wouldn't be, I don't know, I'm kind of jumpy. And if a chicken was near me and it was
Yeah.
alive, I would probably be as jumpy, as if a cricket. It's just, I don't discriminate. So I have a pretty good gauge of like the creepy factor and like it's unsettling to maybe have like a farm of hundreds of thousands of insects. Like,
Yeah.
wow. Sorry if there's noise in the background, by the way, small
That's okay.
apartment. The cricket farming, insect farming in general operations are really tuned into things like invasive speciesness, like respecting like biodiversity, being aware of like what could become a pest. And also like down the line, we should have efforts to grow insects in their most native regions. So like crickets make the most sense in tropical regions with like high humidity and higher heat, like Vietnam and other regions like that. Black soldier fly larvae are, and black soldier flies are totally non-invasive and rated as like a non-pest. And some farmers love this fact that they secrete something that repels houseflies too. It's like an added bonus is like reduce your houseflies if you have black soldier flies around.
Oh.
Their biology is that they store up everything during their larval phase, so they don't eat when they're adults, and they only live for 4 days, and it's just to mate, lay eggs, and die. So they're super non-threatening, and like their larvae are their larvae.
Mm.
With crickets, I know that they have like I'm less familiar today with like the most up-to-date pest rating and like biohazard concern, but those are all deeply accounted for, and they make sure that wherever they're growing it, that like everything from the odor emitted to crickets produce some ammonia when they're being grown, like all that's accounted for and handled in like the highest safety way. And then the pest thing is like a huge consideration. There's a lot of NIMBY, which is like not in my backyard. And then they get thoroughly discussed wherever they're planning on building a facility or having a farm.
All right. So it's definitely something you pay attention to.
Oh yeah, and just also because people get freaked out by it, like it's just a
Yeah.
real factor.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's yeah, makes sense. Um, so I had another thing, and it's something I just really couldn't find any information about online, but thinking about it myself, it seems like it would become an issue. Pretty much because insects they're going to be more efficient with their feed as compared to cattle. They're naturally, I know they produce frass, which is like can be used as a fertilizer. Um, but what I would be concerned about is, with the feed efficiencies, you're just going to get a lot less volume of manure. Um, so, you know, I guess the question becomes like a lot of the world nowadays, I think it's about like half of all crops grown are fertilized with natural manure. It's not in the West so much. I think the U.S. uses like 95% natural synthetic fertilizers. Um, but I guess my question is like, I've done the calculations, and I expect there would be like a fairly large shortfall in the amount of this natural fertilizer we're producing. Is this something like people have put any thought into, done considerations of? Because I feel like we should be moving towards a more natural regenerative type of farming as opposed to towards a further reliance on synthetic fertilizers, which are made with, you know, natural gas or actually coal in China. They make it all out of coal, which is bizarre. But do you have any
Thank
thoughts
you
on
for
this?
highlighting that. Like that's, I'm so happy you brought that up because that's one of the main, today we're trying to really bring soil health to the forefront of this insect discussion. And it's really hard for people to make that connection. They're like, I thought you were talking about bugs. Like, why are you talking about soil? And then you have to talk about like what is synthetic fertilizer, but you get that, so I'll skip it. It's become very in the public discourse with geopolitical turmoil, and then we have a need for like domestic supply of fertilizer. Like our future of food security depends on that. We need that, and it's just prudent, especially now that we have COVID concerns and supply chains are at risk. So, how do we do that? Well, we can do it at home, and the way to do it is to scale up how it happens in nature. Like soil is literally built on frass, meaning like the Amazon, like our current, like our soil, our topsoil that is like black gold and like really nutritious, that comes from um, the natural processes, like before humans were there. That's what made soil. So soil is literally organic matter. It is the uh, bacteria and its residues, like left over from whatever was decomposing it. So insect exoskeletons and other things like that. And then it's like different types of like rocks and gravel and sands of different sizes. And why that's important, there's an incredible resource that we're partnered with called the Soil Food Web. And she's really like doing the deep dive, Dr. Elaine Ingham, on what microbes specifically are existing in the soil and how do they do the things that are important for soil. How do they fix nitrogen? How do they like release and control other nutrients? Like you hear about nitrogen, potassium, and NPK all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And those are just the tip of the iceberg. Like there's a ton more happening within soil that you can find out online, but making sure that those bacteria colonies are diverse, resilient, and sufficient, well fed is really important. Making sure that the soil structure is there, meaning like if you pour water through a cup of sand, it's just pouring through. But if you pour water through a cup of sand with like boulders and pebbles and things of different sizes, or insect exoskeletons, like it'll get pocketed and bubbled up and like held there. So that phenomena is really important to healthy soil, making sure that we minimize nutrient runoff, maximize water retention capabilities, and restore like these pockets that are needed for healthy soil to resume.
Yeah.
And then making sure that the microbiology of the soil is alive and thriving and not dead, which is what happens when you feed it synthetic fertilizer. It's kind of nefarious what we did to farmers in the US, where we like got them hooked on synthetic. It's like getting hooked on a drug, where we killed their soil, removed their independence, made them hooked on increasingly expensive imported synthetic fertilizers, and then said, you have to grow more on the same soil, which like of course
Yeah.
the crops are going to have less nutrients in them because you're extracting from the same thing that you're not replenishing. So black soldier fly farms are really great for domestic fertilizer supply. We can make for every like one larva that's produced, 2 to 3 units of fertilizer are produced. So far more frass comes from the operation than larva. And we don't even talk about that too much because I probably lost a bunch of people right now by going that deep. It's wordy. I haven't nailed it.
No, no. I mean, I think it's great. So yeah. So I guess my concern is particularly like maybe I can send this to you. It's some rough sort of napkin math and like just thinking off the top of my head on this subject. But you know, even if you look at like the dry weights of the frass, frass as opposed to cow manure, which is 90 something percent water, there's still just like there's a big shortfall in those actual nutrients that are produced, like the NPK. So
Oh,
it's something that's just like I've thought of myself, but I haven't been able to get like an actual insight on. So like the end state is that if in a theoretical world where like all cattle were gone and we're only growing insects for protein, I
we
think there
shouldn't
would be
do
a
that.
lot less natural fertilizer available. So it seems as though that might be like an unconsidered shortfall, is that like we're getting, you know, we're forcing ourselves to produce more synthetic fertilizer. It seems it would be the case. I'm just like, I guess I'm trying to get someone to like validate my theory, you know.
Um, I want to, yes, please, let's discuss that. I'm excited to talk about that because we just finished applying for like this fertilizer grant. So we just finished like all of our research on this. And we're very excited about like, yeah, I think that there's, I'm happy to send you resources from our own team and beyond, just about like what is FRAS, how do the numbers work out in the short term and long term. But the real mission here is to restore soil health and like repair the soil food web for your end state. Just as a note, like holistic health and like the future that I want is one that's biodiverse and thriving. And we absolutely need cattle. Like when we lose species, that's when we have problems. So it's like everything in moderation. We just need to close the gap by reintroducing insects in like at the ratios appropriate for where we've scaled other things up to. By no means should we eliminate any species that are there. Like it's just a rebalancing. And I think it can just support the thriving of all the other farming in a lot of ways. So that's the goal, is like support everything by collaborating, adding value to farmers, adding value to like every step along the way of the agriculture production line. And then the nutrients in FRAS, by no means are they a replacement for every single thing in the soil health process. I'm sure like we'll need to ramp up um, the nutrients that you're talking about from cow manure. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like the specific FRAS info that we have,
Yeah.
what's in there.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, again, it's like a pet theory, but you know, I'm just making sure people have like really considered all this stuff. I
I
think,
think you've nailed it though with like the soil as a problem. Like we are in a
yeah.
very bad spot right now with soil health, and people aren't talking about that enough.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're definitely coming from a similar point of view on like the problems with agriculture, and you know, I think the overuse of synthetic fertilizers has, you know, obviously been a big problem. It's probably going to be a even bigger problem in the future. um,
Spot on.
so yeah, I'll send you the stuff, get your thoughts on it, and then you know I'll post that in the video here so you can anyone watching can see what the response was. So yeah, that's on fertilizer. If you got time, I have like a few more quick questions. That's
Yeah.
number one is about, again, one of these things that's hard to find an answer for is sort of the economics of it. Is the idea that to produce like a comparable amount of insect protein, it will be significantly cheaper as compared to, you know, pigs or cattle or what have you? Because it seems like that would be one of like the proposed benefits, especially when you see these plans for like a 12-story building and all the insects are raised by robots or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like, that's a version of the future, certainly. I'm very interested in this at all scales. Like what I love about this as a solution is how modular it is. Like this can work in somebody's kitchen, for a restaurant, for a like a vineyard is a great example, or a brewery. Like they have these spent grains that are a problem, and it's really hard when you have wet waste, especially because you have to like it's heavier with the moisture. It's often like more problematic. There could be like biohazards. It's heavier to transport, and then like what do you do with it? So insects are really good at upcycling wet waste in particular. And so there's a lot like on the margin that it just becomes like if we can eliminate a cost of getting rid of this waste and then turn that cost center into a profit center on multiple fronts, like making the protein and fats and then making the soil health products, like that's a positive economic outcome. Getting there, I think of it kind of like a solar farm investment where in the early days, it was not economically feasible and had to be heavily subsidized by grants and other funding because we didn't have the battery storage technology. Nowadays, it's like more and more advantageous in a shorter and shorter like time horizon. So the return rate is better and more appealing. And that's what happens in technology curves. So with
Mm.
insects, we're not there with like consistent supply chains, with like even regulation, like a marijuana industry is kind of similar to. It's just like there's a lot of price arbitrage happening, like uncertain supply chains, and then like the unit economics have not even been close to hit. But on a single farm level or like a single business level, it can make sense. And that's what Chapul Farms has really done is like IRA or not, subsidies or not, like we've made a model that works for people that are committed to the sustainability and like economic viability of this. And it just takes like a investment that varies depending on if it's for like a restaurant or a corporation on many acres of land, custom fit. And the I think most of our models have it being cash flow positive in 2 to 3 years, which is like a pretty quick return, like for the initial investment to build like a version of an automated, like mid tech, I say, facility. And start getting like turning it into a profit center that
Yeah,
recoups the costs that quickly.
that's fast. Um, Last thing I wanted to ask, because we're gonna have vegans watching this documentary. What would you say to
Yeah.
vegans, basically? Because they're obviously just gonna say like, oh, if it's an environmental thing, let's just do that. Let's eat plants. So kind of what would you say to them, like if they're saying, why even bother with insects?
Yeah. I am fascinated, as you probably are, like, with the vegan question. I think it's hard to answer with one line because people are vegan for different reasons. If people are vegan for spiritual reasons, I have no place to speak. Like it's so personal. If they're vegan for environmental or other like logical reasons, I'd say like the insects make sense. You can do the math. Like you actually kill more bugs by not eating bugs, technically, because like in harvesting the plants, unless you're literally farm to table, like doing it yourself, if you're buying plants at a grocery store, like to get those plants, the pesticides used, the farming methods used, and just like the harvesting of them, you have already killed more insects to get the same amount of nutrients than you would have by just eating the insects to get the nutrients. So there's a funny like paradigm. And then animal health wise, I believe that insects are in environments so that they get to live a full life cycle and thrive and live in a really ideal, like they love, insects are meant to be mass reared in close quarters, not necessarily livestock. So
Yeah.
it's a different equation to consider.
All right. Very cool. Very good answer. Um, that's pretty much everything we wanted to cover, and I know we're already running over on time, so I don't want to keep you. Is there anything else you'd like to say as like a final send off? Maybe you know broad ideas about like changes you'd like to see in the future to our food system, and like what should be the first steps we take.
I just thank you for covering this topic. Like I was so pleasantly surprised to get your email. And just jumped on that because it's hard to get attention today in the attention economy, and there's a lot of sensationalism and whatnot, and there's a lot of cool tech emerging. However, that initial analogy of like we need to get our fundamentals right before building castles. Don't build castles in quicksand. It makes a lot of sense. Whatever your reason, there's a lot of ways to get to. We should probably close the loop on food production. It's just a good thing for a lot of people. And it's not that difficult. We just need cooperation, which is very difficult. So the
Mm-hmm.
more we can get the word out, the better. And we're really hoping to use the next year or two to do this. And then we'll go forward into like
Yeah,
lab grown meat and other things. But this first.
gotcha. Yeah, I'm hoping this can help
Thank you.
desensationalize it a little bit. So,
Yeah.
all right, yeah. If that's it, I'll stop recording. Everyone, thanks for watching, and signing off.
Thank you.